Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News. After a controversial weekend in Texas, one of the least memorable parts of the entire weekend was no doubt the absolutely atrocious sprint race they had on the Saturday. So bad, in fact, that Formula One's chiefs have decided enough is enough and changes will be made to the sprint race format going forwards, but the proposals they're making might even make the situation worse. Toto Wolff says it's time to just get rid of them in the first place and go back to what we used to have. Very much intrigued to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I would greatly appreciate it. Plenty of updates today. Firstly, from the Red Bull camp. We know that things are changing at Red Bull, well at least we think they are. There's all these rumours about Marco and Horner about potential conflict internally, but it does feel like that at least changes are happening to their junior programme. It's become quite clear that they will not be supporting as many drivers as they previously did under Helmut Marko's domain. Only two drivers, Pepe Marti and Isaac Hadjar, will be driving in Formula 2 for Red Bull next year, and Yuma Uwasa, who was in Formula 2 with Red Bull most recently, will be going to Super Formula, which is, if you guys remember, just exactly what Liam Lawson did, and has now gone on to have quite some debut over the last few races before this one in Austin in that AlphaTauri. So this is usually what Red Bull do with a driver they think is quite promising. They'll send them to Super Formula in Japan, and, well, worked out well for Liam Lawson, although, well, has it worked out well for Liam Lawson because he's still not got a seat on the Formula 1 grid for next year, as we presently understand. Obviously, there could be a chance that if Perez is gone, Ricciardo's in, Lawson does get a seat after all. Also on Red Bull, you guys probably know about their new wind tunnel. Their current wind tunnel is from the Cold War, as is Adrian Newey, and to be honest, do they even need a wind tunnel when Adrian Newey can do it all in his head? But still, they are trying to upgrade their wind tunnel. We know that it's been a big talking point with McLaren over the last couple of years, brand new facilities. Red Bull have said they have planned to introduce a new one, but that is now not happening, at least in the short term. They've been forced to withdraw their planning application, which means that their new wind tunnel construction is not really going to start anytime soon. And as he says, you know, no use really on even the 2025 car, so the team will continue to work in its 75-year-old tunnel for now, and it obviously is getting the job done with a bit of help from some wizardry of their technical department, so it's probably not a massive deal, but in the longer term, you know, they want a new wind tunnel, they want better facilities. You can say they probably don't need it, but it is probably something of a disadvantage when a lot of other teams, let's say McLaren, have a brand new facility, so do Aston Martin, and Red Bull are using one which is, you know, from another era. Now, look, they've still built one of the most dominant cars in Formula 1 history, but it could have been even better, and maybe in the future it will be one small factor that might mean that other teams can get closer over the next couple of years, and certainly going into 2026. As Sam Collins says, no clear reasons why this is the case, but they might even have to find a new, effectively, location for the tunnel or significantly modify the plans based on the current situation. And as he mentions, McLaren's one recently came online. Now, this past weekend, lots of storylines, basically none of which were in the sprint race. There was lots of talk about the race itself. Now, look, Hamilton was eventually disqualified regardless. We talked about that in length in yesterday's video, but rumour has it, well, at least according to simulations, that the strategy Mercedes went for, this idea of going long rather than, you know, trying to do the one stop because they probably thought they couldn't beat Max in a two stop, and leaving Hamilton out 3-4 laps longer than necessary, lost him, you know, between 6 and 9 seconds straight up due to strategy. This is the thing that Red Bull have over Mercedes and all the other teams. Every aspect of their performance is stellar, and even their pit stop lap for Verstappen was perfect. And if Hamilton pitted on the same lap Verstappen did, lap 17, there's a good chance that Hamilton even gets the undercut on Norris. And that's what he said after the Grand Prix. Hamilton was like, look, I was 2 seconds behind. That's like the ideal window to go for the undercut there on Lando, because let's say Hamilton, you know, comes into the pits first, big outlap, maybe gains a second and a half. Lando comes out of the pits half a second ahead on cold tyres. Hamilton probably gets him in that first DRS zone and then had more pace and could drive off. So that was the way to win if you're Mercedes, but they bottled it, and even not pitting on lap 17 or lap 16 going into 17 as Verstappen did and pitting one lap later, that would have still been fine to probably secure the victory. But yeah, big mistake, of course. Another big mistake by not setting up the car properly also cost them on the weekends, and actually to such an extent that according to the entire race pace analysis analysis, Hamilton was marginally quicker than Verstappen. Yes, of course, probably would have been a different story had the brake issues not manifested, because in the sprint race, it was a different story entirely. We'll get to that in a second, if you guys can even remember the sprint, because I am struggling to recall some of the details here. Also, this is a big one for Aston Martin fans. The upgrades on Lance Stroll's Aston. So Stroll ran from the pit lane, the brand new modification, but with a different setup, and Alonso ran the old spec. He was quick, Alonso, for sure, but we know that, Alonso and Stroll aren't quite the same in terms of pace, but Stroll was actually matching Norris in the final stint in clean air, and Norris, okay, was falling back from Hamilton a bit and from Verstappen, but nonetheless, that's impressive pace. If Stroll can match Lando, that probably shows the Aston upgrades might actually be working. They brought some upgrades that seemed terrible in qualifying, but this is often what can happen. You bring upgrades, one session to prepare it, because it's a sprint weekend, and another thing, on the negative end, arguably, of a sprint weekend we'll get to in a second. Not much time to prepare these new upgrades, therefore you go into qualifying, you get smoked. That's what happened to Aston Martin, but apparently the upgrades do actually work. Also on Leclerc, I feel bad for this poor guy, man. He must have been thinking, I would do one of those. This is the thing with Leclerc. He was having a conversation before the Grand Prix with Gasly. Of course, not really a competitor, theoretically, for where he was going to finish. And he told Pierre, hey, are you guys also going for the one-stop? And Gasly was like, what are you talking about? Like, there is no way we are putting off the one-stop here, sunshine. We are going for the two-stop strategy. So Leclerc must have heard that and thought, are Ferrari doing a Ferrari? And you'd have thought Leclerc might have said to the team, hey guys, are we sure this is the right idea? Now, to be fair, I think Leclerc did a really good job managing tyres in the first stint to such an extent that they thought they could give it a go. It wasn't the right call, and he got disqualified anyway. Maybe it doesn't matter, but yeah, if I'm Leclerc, I'm frustrated, but at the same time, I'm thinking maybe, could Leclerc have overruled them? Just drive into the pits, do what you want? I don't know. Maybe it's time to take matters into your own hands at this point, Charles. These were, if you can even remember, the sprint race results this weekend. Verstappen won it almost 10 seconds ahead of Hamilton. They had a bit of a battle the first few laps, then Hamilton knew he wasn't going to get him, and probably cruised home for the rest of the race. But he was putting a gap on Leclerc, who was 18 seconds back, and across the points finishes over 19 laps of a race, there was no race. 30 seconds separated the top 6 finishes, pretty much, and that's not necessarily a good look. Now, the Sunday's race was better than this, but this was, okay, maybe there were worse sprint races that I can't remember immediately off the top of my head, but there have been some stinker sprint races. This year, they've honestly got quite lucky because, let's say Austria with the rain, there's been some decent races. Actually, it's been quite entertaining, some of the sprint races, but not necessarily because it's a good format, but just because they got lucky with the timing. Like, let's say Austria, it was the Sunday that had the rain, not the Saturday, then no one would be talking about that being a good sprint, whereas, it could have been otherwise. And okay, sure, you get 2 race days with a sprint, and therefore you get 2 chances for weather conditions maybe to make things slightly more interesting. But on the whole, I'm not a fan of the format, and also it seems a lot of the Formula 1 chiefs aren't as well at this point, because this past weekend, it was so bad. Like, I didn't even make a video on it, and I don't think there's been a sprint race, or even a main race that I haven't made a video recapping in some form for a long time. But there was nothing to talk about. Like, there was no talking points. And sprints have other problems as well. Okay, it's a positive and a negative that the teams have less time to set up their car. They can make mistakes, it makes things more interesting, but also they can make mistakes and teams that could potentially fight Verstappen or whatever for the win get things wrong, such as Mercedes, and therefore they get disqualified, right? So it's kind of a double-edged sword on that one. And also, as soon as qualifying starts for Sunday's Grand Prix as it is now, the setup stays the same through Saturday as well, through the sprint shootout and the sprint race itself, which also means that you can't change anything. So if your setup's bad after Friday, you're basically done for the weekend, or you start from the pit lane and change it, which is what Aston Martin and Haas decided to do. There's also been questions about the sprint shootout. I personally find it quite confusing. You've got qualifying on Friday for Sunday. It's not confusing in terms of the way it works, but it's confusing for fans to understand, all right, well, hang on a second, this guy qualified on pole yesterday, why are we now qualifying again in basically the exact same format, but, okay, the sessions are slightly shorter. It's a bit confusing, right? A lot of people have said, maybe just do practice, 2 sessions of practice on Friday, do qualifying on Saturday morning for Sunday's race, but then Q1 of the qualifying session sets the order for the sprint. That's an interesting idea I saw floating around, which is viable. It could be interesting. You could maybe even make it so that the tyre that you maybe qualify on in Q1 is the same tyre you start the sprint on. I don't know, something like that could be interesting to think about. But the Formula 1 chiefs have watched that weekend, this weekend, and decided, you know what, it ain't working, right? These sprints have gone too far and it's not looking good. So they've come up with some genius ideas, such as the following. Reverse grid is always one that gets thrown around. Either a full reverse grid or what they do in Formula 2 is a top 10 reversed. So you qualify Friday, on Saturday there's a Formula 2 sprint where 10th to 1st get flipped, and then Sunday you qualify with the original grid. That's interesting, but then again, it's a spec series, and I think things are a bit different. And also, you know, in that you kind of want to know, all right, who's got pace in clean air. It's more about finding the drivers than it is actually making an especially competitive tournament championship. And okay, the sprint's can work in those junior categories. I'm not sure that's a good idea in Formula 1. A full reverse grid, if you were to do it based on championship order, would be very interesting, because it would mean that drivers like Sargent or whatever would very much have to, you know, fight very hard. But then again, if you're leading the championship, you start P20, are you even going to get to P8 in a few laps, especially when you've got to overtake the other fastest cars in front of you? Not sure that's a really good idea either. The other one they came up with, which I just find so ridiculous, is they thought, you know what, let's just chuck money at this. They're going to get a sponsor that's going to put up $1 million, apparently, maybe up to $1 million for the sprint race winner. I don't know. So they think that's going to make people care that the winner's going to get more money on the line. I don't really buy that. If the race is bad, people aren't going to watch. It's simply how it works. Or they could make it so that the points from the sprint race don't contribute to the championship, but actually only contribute to a standalone Saturday sprint championship. I don't see how any of these solutions, apart from maybe reverse grid, actually fix the issues with sprint races. And to me, the issue with the sprint race mainly is that it's a massive preview to what we see on Sunday. Max Verstappen has made this point this weekend, many a time actually, and says it takes the mystery away from Sunday. You used to wake up on a Sunday morning and think, wow, I don't know what's going to happen today. I've got to tune in. Verstappen starting P6. Is he going to win? Does he have the pace? Like, are they going to hold him up? What's going on? You watch the sprints. Everyone knows Verstappen's going to win. And sure, okay, he had the brake issue, which made it more sketchy than it could have otherwise been. But, it was very clear after Saturday, Verstappen easily had the pace over the field. And okay, he bided his time, whatever, on the Sunday to eventually make those moves happen. But, it was quite inevitable that Verstappen was going to win, it felt like, until the brake issues manifested and Hamilton had a bit of a chance. But we got to see everything on the Saturday. We knew that Ferrari had some tyre degradation issues. It seemed like that way on the Saturday. We knew that Hamilton had more pace than the Ferraris. We knew that Verstappen was going to win the race. You know that on Saturday. What's even the point watching the race? You could basically predict the outcome on Sunday before you even watch it, which just takes away all the mystery. And, for what benefit, really? I mean, one extra day of racing that often isn't even particularly good because there's another sprint shooter in the morning. That's my main problem with it. So, it's artificial games. This is what Toto Wolff says. It's artificial games they're adding in. And look, he doesn't like them. And I get it. I don't really know how much they really is to like. And Toto Wolff straight up said, I'd just rather not do them if we can avoid them at all. And this is what he goes on to say here, that I'd rather have no sprint races. I'm conservative in racing. Then if we start to meddle even more and do reverse grid races, we're going to a format of the junior formulas. Sport follows entertainment, whilst entertainment should follow sport. And the honesty is about the stopwatch, and that's what attracts us. Creating artificial gaming around the sprint race on a Saturday is not what I would personally prefer. That's my opinion. We've got to do what Stefano says. And he basically said, better off having no sprint races than to start throwing in reverse sprints and all this other gimmicky stuff. So, what do you guys think in the comments below? There's plenty of problems with sprint races in the first place, but as I say, the big one I think is just, it ruins all the interest and the excitement for the race. Because, previously you never knew on a Saturday, qualifying might have just been an absolute banger, and Verstappen might be, I don't know, P2, P3, and Red Bull haven't been looking so good. There's a question there, there's a mystery. Is he going to have the pace? Baku was a prime example of this. Leclerc put it on pole in the main race. Verstappen and Perez were behind, and within a few laps of the sprint, Max had won and Perez was through as well. And it was like, well, I might as well just not watch the Grand Prix on Sunday because it's obviously going to be a Red Bull 1-2, as it eventually was. And, that to me is the problem. I think it doesn't help new fans find extra enjoyment in the sport, and I don't think it makes things more entertaining. So my preference personally would be just get rid of it. I don't see the purpose. I prefer a normal weekend with practice Friday. Now, there is an argument to say less practice is good. Giving the teams 3 hours of practice on a normal weekend is probably more than is necessary. The drivers have said this. The teams want more time if they can get it. The drivers have said, give us an hour or two, we'll be fine. And the teams will want more and more time that they can get. But there was an argument that says, let's say Brazil last year, good sprint race, great race as well. Okay, well, it was a pretty good race to be fair, and different winner, mainly because Red Bull messed up their setup because they only had an hour to do it. And there is an advantage, I think, to throwing in a little bit of chaos that gets sprinkled in when there is only 1 hour of setup time. And sometimes that's good chaos, sometimes that's bad chaos, I think, as we saw this weekend with the eventual conclusion with the disqualifications. There's maybe a place for that. There's always positives when you change a format, but in this case, I think there's more negatives than positives, and my preference would be get rid of it, but you guys might have a different thought in the comments section below, but I just don't really buy that any of the Formula 1 chiefs' ideas to fix it are going to do anything but make it even more gimmicky or even worse, to be honest. Just before we close out, there have been some comments from Mercedes on their pit stops. It's no secret that their pit stops haven't been good. For years, Toto Wolff said they never wanted to be the World Championship pit stop team. There's no point. The intention is to avoid the bad pit stops, the really bad pit stops, and ensure that they have solid pit stops enough to capitalize on the pace advantage of their car and their driver. That's not the case anymore. The other teams have caught up big time, and Mercedes' car is not the fastest on the grid. So having pit stops that look like this is simply not going to cut it. This season, Red Bull, 44-ish% of their pit stops have been under 2.5 seconds, according to Code F1, who's brilliantly put this data together. Ferrari, surprisingly, they do have some stinkers, Ferrari, but they definitely worked hard on their pit stops. There's no doubt that last year they did apparently a load of pit stop practice going into this new season, and it's paid off big time, right? 40%, nearly up to Red Bull standards, of their pit stops have been less than 2.5 seconds. McLaren aren't far behind at all. Mercedes have won. They have won this year. Out of 59 pit stops, one of them under 2.5. And maybe that doesn't matter if the rest of them are all 2.5 to 2.8, but they're not. Most of them are over 3, to be honest. Okay, maybe not most, but, statistically, it ain't great. And that's time in a two-stop race you simply cannot afford to lose if you're a Mercedes, given that you don't have a car that's 10th of a second faster per lap anymore. So Toto Wolff admits this, he knows they have to improve, and he actually said that outright after this weekend, was like, look, yeah, this isn't going to cut it anymore. We've realised it's a big wake-up call, really, that we cannot afford the pit stops from 3 to 3.5 seconds. It's simply too competitive. The other teams have simply improved too much in this category to make that viable. So, that's on Toto Wolff now to ensure that operationally his team improves in all aspects, as they most certainly need to. So very much intrigued to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.